And now, this.
Tonight on Face the Funk, we have author Ian C. Moore, author of Culture Shock, the book. Good evening, Ian.
Good evening, Sonia.
Please describe the term culture shock and how you came about writing this book.
Well, it's a common sort of understanding of the experience that people have when they go to another culture, or they are within their own culture but go to a different aspect of it, and suddenly there's a kind of a dissonance between their understanding of things and what they're used to and what they're presented with. And this creates a kind of imbalance in their understanding of things for a time, and it can range from a lot of personal depressions and as well as a complete rejection of a society. There's usually a process by which people go through. That is, the first step is kind of a complete rejection of the place that they're going into. And then there's a kind of an understanding of things as they stay some time in that culture. And then they usually begin to come out of that after about 6 months or so. And if they're going to stay in the culture, in that particular culture, then by 6 months or so to a year, they've found things within it that have enabled them to balance out what they're used to and what they're now into. Then the next problem is if they have to go back to their own country, then you have re-entry shock.
Mm-hmm. So, well, let's take, this story is about you. There are 10 essays, is that correct? Mm-hmm. And this is really about your own experiences coming from, tell us where you were born.
Well, I was raised in England, and I started traveling in my late teens, and for me it was a push to get out of England and to see something other than the English sort of experience. And I really didn't like being in England very much. It was a class and racist society, which we don't totally have here. It's usually one or the other here. But I was a part of a very small minority of people. There are, even today, there's no more than about 2% of the population are black people or of African descent. So that started me, and then I just traveled whenever I could. I'd come back, I'd get a job, make as much money as I could, work 2 or 3 months, maybe 6 months, and then I'd just travel again.
Now, you arrived in America in 1979, and you write in a book that you went to New York first, came to Oakland, and your first experience with, let's say, racism maybe, perhaps, is when you had a job interview with a headhunter. And this is a paraphrase, and you were told that in no uncertain terms, could you expect a position that would allow you vertical promotion.
Right.
Yes, and how did that perception, that's your perception of America, how did that influence?
Well, I think, as I say in the book, that I go on to say that racism in America is not complicated. When you come from another country, you're made aware of it very quickly. In other parts of the world, racism or classism or whatever are much more subtle processes. Here, people tell you they don't like you, and there's a kind of a liberating aspect to that, because you now know you can never. There's no way you can kind of convince them that that they should like you, so you don't waste your time with that. You then have to find a way to survive and move on from there.
Well, now I'd also like to quote this. You say here in your first chapter, Coming to America, American Africans pride themselves on being history's biggest victims. If no other group, black or white, could possibly have suffered so much. Explain that. Is that fair?
Well, fair to black Americans or fair to the rest of black people and the rest of the world?
Well, fair to make that assessment.
Well, I mean, it's my perspective of it. I mean, whether it's fair or not is for others to make the determination. But I mean, I came from Scotland, for example. They've had 1,000 years, not 400, but 1,000 years of being oppressed by the English. The Irish have been similarly sort of treated badly, you know. So in terms of time, you know, there's no comparison, you know. Now, on the other hand, people say, well, they're white, you know, and that's different. You know, they may be hated, but they're white. Well, the reason that there are more Scottish people outside of Scotland than there are now is because the English purposely cleared villages and towns and put animals and put sheep there and literally kicked the people out and sent them to prison camps and all over the place. It has created within the Scottish people a tremendous sort of tribal sense and, you know, within themselves because they were never able to unite because they were always being, you know, attacked from different sides. But the one good thing, the one thing that they unite over is their hatred of the English. Now, conversely, you come to America, and I came primarily to California. Most Californian blacks have no level of discrimination compared to the southern states or to some degree even the Midwest and and the eastern states. And what I found is that there's almost like a regional kind of, almost you can call it regional or tribal aspect within black Americans. People from Texas are not like those that come from Mississippi or North Carolina or the East Coast or the Midwest.
So that's another type of culture shock from someone who might be from Mississippi to California.
Absolutely, and I met people, you know, I met people that had come up from Mississippi, and it was a profound culture shock. I mean, outside of the black-white issue, there's a lot of undercurrents, and I think the emphasis of the book is not so much that that there is one dominant, you know, thing that's happening. You know, I think any oppressed people constantly remind themselves about the main oppressive force coming at them. But the answer to a lot of that is to diversify into lots of, you know, other cultural expressions, you know. And at the end of the day, it's about, you know, the personality, the individual developing themselves and making themselves a better person, overcoming these obstacles. And ultimately, the book talks to those issues. It says, you know, by going to all these different places, you get rid of all of these little prejudices. You know, you expose yourself to different cultures and begin to get an idea that we are all human beings and we have to reach out for that betterment in ourselves and those around us.
Now, you're born in the UK from an area called Brixton, and you're the product of a biracial union, parents. And in Brixton now, from you right here, let's see, on the road to Ramadan, comparing Brixton to being here, and then you have this road, you go back, it's actually see London and die. That was the first time you returned back to the UK. Right. And it was a totally different, a new culture shock. I guess you could say your second level, the re-entry.
The re-entry shock, going back to the place that you had left some years before and thinking that you had grown up. One of the most disturbing things I think about traveling generally is that whenever you travel, even if you just go to visit some friends in, you know, a place you haven't been there, if you go away for a week or 2 weeks or something, there's a sense of changing, you know, because you're exposed to different and new things. And when you come back, one of the disturbing things is that nobody seems to have changed. And maybe they have, but it's very difficult to perceive that, you know. And when you've left the country, and I was away, I think, 4 or 5 years before I went back, and I'd grown up, of course, and I'd seen a lot of other things, and I'd overcome all my prejudices that I had about being in England. But going back, all those same buttons were easily pushed. And one of the things I guess I have to say, for black people coming to America who are from somewhere else, it's very easy to sort of dismiss the issue of race for black Americans. But the fact of the matter is, it's built into people's sort of DNA, if you will. You know, again, when I went back to England, all the prejudice that I thought that I'd left behind, it just fired off again, you know.